Well, hi, and thanks for joining me for the second episode of the Hockey Dad Diaries. I'm the Hockey Dad. I'd like to welcome you to the show. If you haven't checked out our first episode, make sure you go and do that. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, make sure you do that as well so that you are aware of, or notified, I should say, when new episodes come out. All right, so as promised in the last episode, today I'm going to talk a little bit about the levels of play, what they're called in youth hockey in both Canada and the U.S., and hopefully give you a little handle on it, because I remember when my son had started, we were taking him to learn to skate, then learn to play, and the names of the levels were just like mind-blowing to me. It's like, oh, what am I? I'm a mite, I'm a this, I'm a that. And so I'm hoping that, if I can give you this sort of rundown of what they're called and make some sense of it all, it'll be a little bit easier for you as your kids go through the ranks of, minor hockey. So let's just start with some background. Things in Canada and the U.S. used to be more similar, but back in 2016, there were some changes, and USA Hockey, which is the governing body for hockey in the United States, made some changes to the way that they delineate or what they call the groups for various ages in the U.S. And Canada stuck with what they have. So prior to 2016, the U.S. and Canada had more similar designations, and now it's a little bit different. It's really just, semantics. It's what they're calling it. It doesn't really make that much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. Canada has their list of words for these different levels, and the U.S. has theirs. That's all it is. And I want to start off by saying that these names that I'm going to be giving you, these levels of play, they are primarily for club hockey, for youth hockey that you're playing out of teams at your rink, not high school hockey. Okay, it's different. So high school hockey, depending upon your local high school, you might have a freshman team, you might have a JV team and a varsity team, or maybe you just have JV and varsity or freshman and varsity, whatnot. Some schools, I know, just have a varsity team. The difference with high school hockey is that the team is made up of oftentimes kids of various levels of play. And you might be able to, make the high school team, but have only started skating when you were 10 or 11. What we're going to be talking about with these different levels, this is really that youth hockey association skating, where you're playing within your rink and your local, team or regional team, because as you'll see, rinks, depending upon where you live in the country, are situated in certain areas, and teams are housed in those rinks. And so you have to make decisions as to where you're going to go as a parent, how far you're going to drive, what your time commitment, availability, that sort of thing is. And all of that we're going to get to on other episodes. I think it's really useful information for parents, especially parents just getting into the sport, to kind of get a handle on what it all looks like from a time perspective, a money perspective, and your own child's desire to play the sport. And it's so tough. We're asking these little kids to make decisions about their commitment level, and it's unlike, in my opinion, any other sport. I said last episode, you could never pick up a football and decide that you're going to try out for the freshman team and be that good of an athlete that you start playing in high school and end up playing in college and beyond. Hockey is different. So let's start with the lowest level of hockey in the United States. And that age range is from 5 to 6 years old, and it's called mini mites. So if you're 5 to 6 and you're playing on a team, you're a mini mite. Now you might say to me, well, what happens before that? Because I know I've talked about the fact that my kid started skating around 3.5. Well, at that point, you are simply involved in a learn to skate or a learn to play program. There's no USA Hockey designator for you. So anything before 5 years old, it's either learn to play, learn to skate, or you're just taking skating lessons. So from 5 to 6, you're a mini mite. From ages 7 to 8, you're a mite. From ages 9 to 10, you're a squirt. From 11 to 12, you're a peewee. From 13 to 14, you're a bantam. For ages 16 and under, you're considered a minor midget. That's also referred to in the U.S. as 16U. And then 18 and under, you're a major midget, okay, also known as 18U. Now, interestingly enough, you can see that at the mini mite age, you're 5 to 6, mites 7 to 8, squirts 9 to 10, 11 to 12, 13 to 14. Once you get up into the 18U, you could, in theory, be anywhere from 15, 16, 17 to 18, playing 18U. Whereas 16U, it's similar to the younger ages where it's a 2-year difference, 15 and 6, or 1 year difference, I should say, not 2 years, 15 to 16. So 18U is when you really see that difference, because you could be playing with kids that are, 15, 16, 17, 18. All right, so that's how we in the United States designate your level of play. You're a mini mite, you're a mite, a squirt, a peewee, a bantam, 16U minor midget, or 18U major midget. That's what we do in the U.S. Now, there's some things that we want to talk about in a few minutes that make this even more complicated, because you can split up those groups into different divisions. And we'll get to that in a minute, but I want to focus now for a moment on Canada. So what do they do in Canada that's different? So in Canada, ages 6 to 9 is simply referred to as hockey 1 to 4. From ages 9 to 10, which is the equivalent of the U.S.'s squirt program, you're called an atom. From 11 to 12, you're a peewee. From 13 to 14, you're a bantam. 15 to 17, you're a midget. 18 to 19, you're a juvenile. It sounds like you're a juvenile delinquent, but you're not. You're a juvenile hockey player in Canada. So that's the difference. Now you can see how, they're similar in age ranges, but we just call them something different. So does it really make a difference? Yeah, I don't know. It's just what you call it. But I know that as a new parent to the sport, it's confusing sometimes to try to figure out what you are. Mini mite, squirt. So hopefully that helps. All right, now here's where it becomes a little more complicated. So USA Hockey, and that's what we're going to focus on right now, is just USA Hockey. It designates 4 skill levels. And this is for each of those levels of youth hockey that we just talked about. So mini mites, squirts, peewees, etc. USA Hockey further then breaks this down further by Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Now, you're going to have heard these terms in other ways. Some people call it Tier 1, but most commonly you'll hear AAA. Tier 2, you're going to hear AA or A. And then Tier 3 is really referred to as recreational development or house league. Sometimes it's called B and C. I know that a lot of times when you're playing with mites, you could be in mite B, mite C, mite A. But then as you advance, I don't see so much of the B and C. I see those just being, dropped, and you play house league. So let's look at what all this means. So when you're in, let's say, squirts, Remember, we talked that the age range is from 9 to 10 when you're in a squirt program. But depending upon the amount of kids in your organization and what the organization has, you could be on Squirt AAA. You could be on Squirt AA. You could be on Squirt A. And there might be a variety of teams. Typically, organizations only carry one AAA team for an age group, right? So there's typically there's one AAA squirt team. That doesn't mean that you couldn't be in an organization that has two. I've seen, organizations that have had multiple levels or multiple AAA teams just simply because of the volume of kids that are playing. But that's typically what you're going to see. Personally, and we're going to talk about this too in the future, just because a kid plays AA doesn't mean that that kid is not going to be able to make it in college to a D1 school or even to the NHL. And we're going to talk about in the future some of those NHL players that have or traditionally were tier 2 AA players that have gone on to have successful careers. So, I make no representation as to how USA Hockey delineates the difference between AAA or Tier 1 and AA, because I think that it's very much what your kid puts into it. It's just like everything. What you put in is what you get out. And so you could have a family that maybe is not able to afford a AAA team and feels more comfortable financially or from a time perspective. Maybe there's a lot of kids in the family, and AA is more in line with what they can afford. That doesn't mean that your kid's not going to play at a D1 school. It's just what you choose to do. And I've heard from a lot of coaches who, some people get so focused around the AAA label. I've heard a lot of coaches talk to parents and say to them, listen, just because they're AAA doesn't mean that they're going to make a particular college, and you're you're tier 2, you're AA, you're not going to make it. No, it's what you put into this sport and your passion and your drive and your desire, because at the end of the day, you could go to practice 3 times a day. And if you don't put in that hard work, you're going to get nothing out of it. A kid that goes to practice once a day and gives 110% versus a kid that goes to practice 3 times a day and puts in 60%. It really comes down to quality versus quantity in this sport. So getting through that, then let's look at how USA Hockey designates the breakdown in levels. They say that the highest level of competition is AAA, and that's the Tier 1 designator, followed by AA or A, Tier 2, and then, House League. All right, now, if this wasn't confusing enough, let me confuse you even more. Well, hopefully I'm not confusing you. Hopefully I'm helping you weed through this. But USA Hockey will break down those AAA, AA teams, especially in larger organizations, with a designator of major or minor. So let's use our squirt example. So you're squirt, and in the U.S. now that your age is 9 to 10. And now you know that there's AAA and there's AA. Well, let's say you're on the AAA squirt team. You could be squirt AAA major or squirt AAA minor. Now, what that normally means is that a 10-year-old, right, the highest age group in that squirt level, would be squirt AAA major. And the 9-year-old squirt would be a squirt AAA minor. Now, there's the ability in certain situations for kids to play up. It's not common. I'm not going to say it's common. I mean, I see it happen often, but I'm still not going to say it's common, because of the way that USA Hockey likes to try to develop the kids. There are certain situations where, going back to the squirts again, maybe you have a 9-year-old that plays up on the squirt major team. So a 9-year-old playing with kids that are 10 years old. That happens. What you can't do is you can't play down. Okay? So you can have a player play up, but you can't have a player play down. Like, you can't take a peewee age kid and stick him with the squirts. You can't do that. That makes sense. But you can in certain situations play up. Now, how do I feel about playing up? Well, I think that it's up to the individual player and the parent. So obviously, like I said, I don't think it's all that common. In certain organizations, kids play up more frequently. And in some situations, for some kids, it's the right thing to do, right? Because maybe the kid is developed enough, both physically and emotionally or intellectually, to be able to play up, and they do a great job. And so in those instances, yeah, it's right for your kid. It's right for the team. It's right for, you as a parent. However, I have seen some parents try to insist that their kids play up because, for whatever reason, they want their kid to play up because they're carpooling. And sometimes when a kid plays up and they're not ready, whether it's emotionally or physically, then it's detrimental to their development. So, I'm a big believer in really knowing your kid and knowing whether or not your kid can play up or whether your kid shouldn't play up. And that's something that is a very sort of personal discussion that you've got to have with your kid. I've at the younger levels, right? I think it matters a little less if you have a kid playing up. It's kind of in that middle range, squirts to maybe bantams, where you've got to make sure that your kid is developing at the right pace. Because once you get up to 18U, we talked about the fact that it could be 15 to 18, so it's different there, right? If you're playing 18U, you've risen through the ranks, and your own maturity levels, your own skill levels. But sometimes, with the younger kids, it's very parent driven, and you have to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your kid for their development. You don't want to play a kid up when they're not ready for it, but that's just something to think about. And again, your kid might never be asked to play up. I mean, I've been involved with organizations where they would never, ever ask anyone to play up, even if it was in the best interests of the kid or the team. That's just their policy. And then I've been in other teams where, if the kid's ready, the coaches are going to assess it. And if it's right for the kid, right for the parent, right for the team, they let them play up. So, all right, now getting back to this designation of AAA, AA again. Again, USA says AAA Tier 1 is the top level of play. Teams are formed by tryouts. And for AAA Tier 1, players can come from anywhere. They can come from out of state and try out for the team. So that's, how they look at this, and they say this is the most competitive level, because you could bring kids in from around the area and from far out as well if you wanted to. No, I don't know what parent would drive from Washington State to Florida, right? It makes no sense, but technically you could in AAA. All right, now similarly, AA also has tryout requirements. So just like AAA, AA teams and A teams, you have to try out. The difference is that, generally speaking, the players are limited to players within their districts. and a maximum of 3 players can come and play outside their district at a AA or an A level. But, that's the primary distinction, not including the money or the travel. And when we get into, full discussions on other episodes of AAA, AA, and what it all means, we can talk about the differences in money and time and the investment that you and your kids have to make, not just from a financial investment, but otherwise. And then, the teams or the leagues that have B and C teams, these house league tier 3, generally there's no tryouts. Everyone plays. Teams are typically formed by drafts. That's a typical rundown of how it would work. So you would have the most competitive levels, AAA, the next most competitive levels, AA, A, and then tier 3, which is the house leagues. So to sum this all up, because I know there's a lot of words, I'm saying a lot of things, and I just want to sum it all up to make it easy. If you're in the U.S., you're going to be taking your kids when they're young, 3, 4, under 5, and they're going to be doing learn to play, learn to skate programs. When they get into the 5 to 6 age range, they're mini mites. 7 to 8, they're mites. 9 to 10, they're squirts. 11 to 12, they're peewees. 13 to 14, they're bantams. 16U, they're midgets. 18U, they're major midgets. Within that breakdown, you've got AAA teams, AA teams, A teams, and then tier 3 house league teams. And then within that distinction, you've got AA major, AA minor, AAA major, AAA minor. That's the overview. That is how it all works. It probably is easier to see when you draw it all out on a chart, and maybe we'll put something like that up on one of our social media channels, but that's typically how it works. And hopefully that makes sense and gives you just some insight so that if you're a new parent to the hockey world, you're getting something from this, because that's what I'm hoping to do here. I'm just hoping to share some insight, not just from a factual standpoint, but as we move through the episodes, talk about some experiences and personal things so that you get a better handle on what it's like to be a hockey parent. All right, moving along, I want to do 2 more things today before we end this episode. As I told you last time, we're always going to do it today in hockey history. And so we're going to do that. But then I'm going to add something. We're going to add a trivia question to it and see how many of you guys get the trivia question right. We'll put it up on social media, see if you can get the right answer. And as the podcast develops, hopefully we can give away some prizes and things like that. All right, so today in hockey history, today being August 31st, today we celebrate Alex Ovechkin signing his entry-level contract. So on this day, August 31st, 2004, Alex Ovechkin signed his entry-level contract, and he signed with, of course, the Washington Capitals. He was the first pick of the 2004 NHL entry draft. How many of you think that Ovechkin will stay with the Capitals until he retires? I think he will. All right, next, our trivia question. So, again, I'm going to post the trivia question up on social media. If you don't follow us on Instagram, make sure you do. The channel's developing just like the podcast, brand new. Here's the trivia question. How many players can play on each NHL team? Now, I know you can run out and Google this, and it'll give you the answer, but that's not fun. So I don't want you to look this up. I want you to use your best guess. How many players on each NHL team? And then we're going to answer the question on the next podcast. All right, well, that's going to do it for today's episode. I know it was a little, maybe a little dull because we had to go through the levels. But as the podcast develops, like I said a few minutes ago, I want to sort of bring in some personal stuff, let you know what it's like to be on a AAA team or a AA team, or, what it looks like when you're traveling, and just go through the whole experience as a hockey dad so that you have a better handle on what the hockey world is. And for you older parents who have been around, I hope that you stick around and subscribe to the podcast so that you can see what we talk about in the future, because I'm hoping that the podcast will touch everybody, not just brand new parents, but it'll have something for everybody. That's going to do it. I want to thank you for joining me. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please do so. And if you haven't told anybody about it, please do that as well. It always helps when you share information. Hockey is a small world, as I said in the first episode, and we greatly appreciate you subscribing and sharing the podcast. That's going to do it. We'll see you next time.